Hello, you're on Behind the Photo. Subscribe, leave a like, and write one word in the comments what you feel when you look at old photographs. Now take a breath. The story begins. Enjoy the watch.
I want to show you three photographs tonight. They were made by three different people who never met one another, on three different cameras, across almost 100 years. And I am going to tell you, before we even begin, the one thing about them that I have not been able to explain in all the years I have worked here. And it is this. All three of them were taken in the same place, and all three of them caught the same thing. My name is Vaughn Keller. I keep an archive. That is not a glamorous thing to be, a keeper of an archive, and I will not pretend to you that it is. For most of my working life, it has meant boxes. Forest Service boxes, survey boxes, donated boxes, the photographic record of a piece of country in the far north of California that takes in Mount Shasta and the Trinity Alps, and a great deal of very deep, very old forest in between. The Shasta-Trinity. Millions of acres of it. People come to that country, and they look at the mountains standing up white and alone over the trees, and they think it is one of the beautiful places of the earth. And they are right. It is. I have spent 30 years filing the proof of how beautiful it is. Glass plates from survey expeditions, family snapshots, somebody's grandchildren mailed in after a death, lookout logs, backpacker prints, the visual memory of a forest, sorted and labeled and laid flat in acid-free folders, because that is the job. And somewhere in that 30 years, slowly, the way you notice that a sound has been going on for a while before you consciously hear it, I started to notice the frames. I need to be careful how I tell you this, because the easy version is a lie, and I have no use for the easy version. The easy version is that I went looking for something. I did not. Nobody who keeps an archive goes looking for anything. You process what comes in. You file it under where it was taken and when, and you move to the next box. It took me the better part of 30 years and three separate boxes, donated decades apart by people who had no connection to each other, before I laid three particular photographs side by side on the same table and felt the floor of my certain, orderly, paper and label world quietly drop away. The first photograph was made in 1902. It is a glass plate, a survey panorama, beautiful work, the kind of thing a man made when a single exposure was an event. The second was made in 1954. It is an ordinary little black and white snapshot off a child's box camera, a family by a lake. The third was made in 1998, a cheap color print off a disposable camera, two young men grinning at the end of a long hike. 52 years between the first and the second, 44 years between the second and the third. Three different decades, three different kinds of camera, three different families of strangers who, I have spent years checking, never once crossed paths in their lives. And every one of those three photographs has the same wrong thing standing in it. Not in the same corner, not at the same distance. The thing is doing something a little different in each one. The way a thing that is alive does something different each time you see it. But it is the same impossible proportion, the same wrongness that your eye snags on before your mind will agree to look at it directly. And here is the part that took the floor out from under me, the part I have brought you here tonight to sit with me through, one photograph at a time. In all three cases, every single time, the person holding the camera swore that there was nothing there. The surveyor in 1902 looked at that ridge through his own lens and saw an empty skyline. The family in 1954 looked at that tree line and saw trees. The young men in 1998 looked at each other and the lake and saw a nice place to take a picture at the end of a good day. None of them saw it. Every one of their cameras did. I have thought about that more than I have thought about anything else in my life, and I am going to give you the thought now, at the start, because everything else I tell you tonight rests on it. We trust our eyes, we believe that what we see is what is there. But the eye is not a recording instrument. The eye is a storyteller. It takes the flood of the world, and it edits, it discards, it builds you a calm, sensible picture of the place you are standing in, and it quietly leaves out anything that does not fit. Because a mind that saw everything, that was actually present, could not function, could not walk a trail, could not point a camera and smile. The lens does not do that. The lens is stupid. In the most honest way, a thing can be stupid. It does not know what is supposed to be there. It does not protect you. It simply opens, and it lets in whatever light is falling, all of it. The part you are allowed to see, and the part that has been kept from you. And it writes that light down on glass or film without 1 ounce of mercy, or editing, or doubt. And in that one drainage of the Shasta-Trinity, 3 times across 100 years, the light that fell carried something the people standing in it were not permitted to see, and 3 cameras, who knew no better, wrote it down. I have the plates, I have the prints. They are real, they are processed correctly. There is no double exposure, no scratch, no trick of chemistry. And I have had people far more expert than I am tell me so. People I brought in precisely because I badly wanted, to be told I was a lonely old man seeing patterns in noise. They could not tell me that. The frames are clean. Whatever is in them was in front of the lens when the shutter opened. So tonight I am going to lay them down for you one at a time, in the order they were made across the century. And I am going to tell you everything I have been able to learn about the 3 sets of strangers who made them. And I am going to ask you to do the hard thing, the thing all 3 of those camera holders failed to do until the film came back. I am going to ask you to look. We begin in the summer of 1902 with a government surveyor named Elias Thorne, a glass plate camera on a wooden tripod, and a far gray ridge that 2 men swore, with their lives and their reputations, was empty. So pour yourself something, and turn your lamp down, and come and stand at the table with me. The first plate is the quietest of the 3. It is also, I have come to believe, the worst, because it is the one that proves how long this has been going on, and how patient it is. Look with me. Elias Thorne was a survey photographer, and I want you to understand what that meant in 1902, because it tells you what kind of man we are dealing with, and what kind of man does not make mistakes with a camera. In those years, the government was still mapping the high country of the Shasta-Trinity, the real back country, the drainages that had no roads and barely had trails, and they sent men in on foot and on mule to photograph it. Thorne was one of those men. He carried a glass plate camera, a great heavy wooden thing on a tripod, and a case of glass plates, each one coated and handled like it was made of money, because it nearly was. You did not waste exposures. A man like Thorne would study a scene for an hour before he committed a plate to it. He knew light the way a sailor knows weather. He was, by every account I have been able to find, a sober, exact, unimaginative professional. which is exactly the kind of witness you want, and exactly the kind of man this country seems to choose. He went in that summer with a packer named August Lindqvist, a Swede, a quiet, experienced mountain man who knew that part of the Trinity Alps as well as any white man then living. The two of them worked their way up a long drainage toward a high basin under one of the unnamed cinder peaks, a place of black volcanic glass and cold, standing water and very old trees. And it is that basin, that exact basin, that all three of my photographs were taken in. I didn't know that when I first filed Thorne's plate. I learned it later, the hard way, by triangulating the others against it. But that is where he was. I have Thorne's field notebook. The Forest Service kept it, and it came to me in the same box as the plates. And I have read it more times than is healthy. And I want to read you the part that matters, because it is short, and because a man like Thorne did not write things down that were not true. On the evening of the relevant day, he made a panorama. Several plates swung across the head of the basin to capture the whole skyline, the ridge of black glass standing up against the last light. Standard work. And in his notebook that night, he wrote, and I am quoting him exactly, made 5 plates of the North Ridge at last light. Lindqvist, uneasy, wished to be down before dark. Would not say why. Ridge, bare. Good, clean exposures. Expect strong results. Ridge bare. That is the surveyor's eye, the trained eye. The eye that had studied that skyline for an hour through the ground glass of his own camera. Bare. There is one more line. It is written in a different ink, which means a different sitting, probably late that night or the next morning. It says only, L will not go back up the basin. Says we were watched from the ridge. I saw nothing. Note his unease for the record. I saw nothing. Those are the last words Elias Thorne ever wrote about that place, because the plates were not developed in the field. Glass plates went home in their cases, in the dark, and were developed weeks later in a proper darkroom. And by the time that ridge gave up what it was holding, Thorne and Lindqvist were 200 miles away, and the summer was over. Now I have to tell you about August Lindqvist, the packer, because he is the only one of the 4 people in this first story who understood what had happened, and he understood it before the plate was ever developed, and he understood it the way the body understands a thing the mind refuses. Lindqvist would not go back up the basin. Thorne notes it twice. The Swede, the experienced man, the one who knew that country cold, sat at the foot of that drainage and would not climb back up to retrieve a plate case strap he had left. And when Thorne pressed him, he said only that they had been watched from the North Ridge at last light, watched the whole time they were making the panorama by something standing on the skyline. And Thorne, reasonable Thorne, had looked at that skyline through a camera for an hour and seen nothing on it. And so he wrote down his packer's unease the way you would note a barometric reading, a fact about the weather, and they went home. The plate was developed that autumn in a government darkroom by a technician who had never been within 500 miles of the Shasta-Trinity and had no reason on earth to expect anything but a ridge. I have that man's name too, and one note he made, and his note is the coldest document in the whole box. He wrote on the developing record, Plate 4 of North Ridge series shows figure on skyline, presumed survey assistant or local, very large, possibly defect in emulsion, flagged for Mr. Thorne's review. Figure on skyline, very large. There was no survey assistant on that ridge. There was no local. Thorne and Lindqvist were the only 2 human beings in that basin, and they were below the ridge, at the camera, looking up at it. Whatever stood on that skyline in Plate 4 of the Northridge series stood there alone, a long way off, at the very limit of where the failing light could reach. And it was so large that a darkroom technician's first sane thought was that the glass itself had failed, because nothing that was actually a person could be that size at that distance and still throw an image. I have looked at Plate 4 more times than I have looked at my own face in a mirror. The ridge is exactly as Thorne described it, bare black glass against a dying sky. And up on the highest point of it, small with distance but unmistakable, there is a standing shape. It is too tall. That is the first thing, and it is the thing you cannot argue your way out of, because Thorne's own survey gives you the scale of that ridge, gives you the height of the trees on it, and the shape standing among those trees is half again their height. It is dark, and it is narrow, and it is upright, and its head, if the top of it is a head, is turned down the slope, toward the basin, toward the small wooden camera and the two men below who could not see it, across a distance that no eye could have crossed. It was looking at them. It knew the camera was there, and it let the camera have it, at the very last of the light on the one plate of 5, where the exposure ran long enough to catch what was standing in the dark beside the day. Lindqvist was right. They were watched from the ridge. He felt it, the way the animal in us still sometimes feels the thing the eye has been trained to drop. And Thorne, honest Thorne, wrote, "I saw nothing." And he was also telling the truth. And that is the horror of the first frame. The quiet, 100-year-old horror that I told you was the worst. Both men were telling the truth. One of them felt it and could not see it. One of them looked straight at it and could not see it. And the stupid, honest glass, who felt nothing and feared nothing and knew nothing, saw it perfectly and kept it for 100 years and handed it to me. That is 1902. Hold it, because in 1954, 52 years later, in the same basin, a little girl with a box camera is going to start pointing it at the tree line and telling her parents about a tall man, and her parents are going to laugh. Stay with me at the table. The second frame is harder, because in the second one, it has come down off the ridge. The second photograph came to me in a shoebox in 1991, mailed to the archive by a woman who was cleaning out her late mother's house and thought the Forest Service might want some old camping pictures from the Shasta-Trinity. People do that. You would be amazed what comes to an archive in a shoebox. Most of it is exactly what it looks like. This was not. The pictures were from the summer of 1954, and they are the Brunner family. Ray Brunner, a machinist from Reading, his wife, and their 2 children, on a 2-week camping trip to a cold lake up under the peak. The same basin. I did not know that yet, in 1991. I filed them under Shasta-Trinity, Family Recreational, 1950s. And I did not look at them hard, and they sat in a drawer for 20 more years before I laid them next to Thorne's plate and had to sit down. But the Brunners are not really Ray's story. They are his daughter's story. Lenora Brunner, who was 7 years old that summer, and who had a brownie box camera of her own, a little black one her father had given her, and who spent that whole 2 weeks, by every photograph she took, pointing it at the tree line. I have most of Lenora's own roll, a 7-year-old's photographs, which means they are crooked and badly aimed, and half of them are her own thumb. The lake, the dirt, the back of her brother's head, and then, again and again, the dark wall of the trees at the edge of the camp. Not the mountain, which is the beautiful thing, the thing a child is told to photograph. The trees, The same stretch of tree line, over and over, 12, 15 times across 2 weeks. A little girl turning her camera to the same dark gap in the timber, the way you would keep glancing at a person who was looking at you. And here is what her mother wrote, decades later, on the back of one of the prints, in an old woman's hand, long after Lenora was grown and gone. She wrote, "Lenny's tall man." She would not stop talking about him. We thought it was a game. That is all. Lenny's tall man. The family story, the one the woman who mailed me the box included in a letter, was that little Lenora spent that entire trip insisting there was a tall man who stood in the trees and watched the camp, mostly at dusk, and that he was very tall, taller than the trees, she said, which is the kind of thing a 7-year-old says, and that he never came closer and never went away. He just watched. And that she was not exactly afraid of him, but she wanted everyone to know he was there. And her parents did the thing that every parent in this story does, the thing that is so reasonable and so loving and so wrong. They smiled. They said, "That is nice, Lenny." They told her to go play, and when she pointed her little camera at her tall man, they thought it was the sweetest thing in the world, a child photographing her imaginary friend, and they let her use up roll after roll of film on the empty trees, because film was cheap enough by 1954, and a happy child is worth a few rolls of film. Her tall man is in 3 of those frames, not all 12 or 15. He did not perform for the camera, but in 3 of them, at the dark edge of a sunny snapshot of a little girl's summer, standing in the gap in the timber she kept aiming at. There is an upright shape that is too tall for a man, narrow and dark and still, and it is in a slightly different place in each of the 3, and the order of the frames matters, because I have the dates. The drugstore stamped them. And across those 3 frames, over about 9 days, it is closer to the camp each time. In the first one, it is well back in the trees, just a darkness with a shape to it, the kind of thing you would never see if a child had not spent 2 weeks telling you exactly where to look. In the second, taken about 5 days later, it has come forward to the very edge of the timber, and you can see now that the proportion is the thing, the same wrong proportion, off Thorns Ridge 52 years before, a height that the trees around it will not let you explain away. And in the third, taken near the end of the trip, it is at the tree line, just at the tree line, where the shadow of the forest ends and the sunny grass of the family's camp begins, as far forward as it ever came, standing where, if it had taken one more step, it would have been out in the open, in the light, in the world the grown-ups were allowed to see. It did not take that step, or it had not yet. The Bruners packed up and drove home to Reading, with 2 weeks of happy snapshots, and a little girl who kept looking out the back window, and the roll went to the drugstore, and the prince came back, and as far as I can tell from everything the family preserved, not one adult Bruner ever once noticed what was standing at the edge of their daughter's photographs. They saw a sweet child's game. They had been seeing a sweet child's game the whole time. Lenora was not playing a game. Lenora was the only person in that camp whose eyes had not yet learned to do the merciful editing that grown eyes do, the dropping of the thing that does not fit. And so Lenora simply saw her tall man, plainly, for 2 weeks, and could not understand why no one else would look. And there is a witness. This is the part that takes the 54 story out of being just one strange family and puts it back into the pattern, because I went looking. Once I understood what I had, and I found the lookout log, there was a fire lookout. That summer, on the next peak over, a man named Clee Hassinger, and the Forest Service keeps those logs, and I found his. And on a date that falls squarely in the Brunner's 2 weeks, at dusk, Clay Hassinger logged, in the dry official language of a man making a report he knows will be read by his superiors, a sighting. He logged a figure standing at the lake at last light, and he noted the bearing and the conditions, like the professional he was. And then he wrote one line that got him a reprimand in his file because his supervisor read it as a man who had been alone on a mountain too long. He wrote, "Figure at lake estimated taller than surrounding trees, unable to account, not a bear. Taller than surrounding trees, unable to account. 2 witnesses, 52 years after Thorne's plate. A 7-year-old who had not yet learned not to see, and a fire lookout who watched that country professionally for a living. Both of them describing the same impossible height, in the same basin, at the same last light of the day. And in between them, a stack of a child's happy summer snapshots, with the thing standing patient at the edge, coming forward, frame by dated frame, toward a family that smiled and told her it was nice. That is 1954. It has come down off the ridge. It has crossed the basin. It has come to the very edge of the firelight, and the family, and the child who would look at it. And then it waited 44 more years. Stay with me, because in 1998, 2 young men are going to walk into that same basin with a camcorder and a disposable camera, and they are going to be the first people in this whole 100-year story to get something on film that is not standing at a distance. In 1998, it is going to be a few feet away, and it is going to have a face. The third set came to the archive the most ordinary way of all. A man drove up one afternoon in 2009 and donated them in person, an envelope of prints and a video cassette. And he did not stay long, and he did not want to talk about them. And the only reason I have his story at all is that I recognized, the moment I slid those prints out of the envelope, what I was holding. And I asked him to sit down, and something in my face made him do it. His name was Trevor Lund, and in the summer of 1998, he had been 22 years old, and he and his best friend had gone backpacking in the Shasta-Trinity. The friend's name was Mateo Reyes. They were good in the woods, fit, experienced, the way young men are who have grown up hiking. And they went deep, deeper than most people go, up a long drainage to a cold lake under an unnamed cinder peak. You know the basin by now. I did not have to ask. I knew it the way you know a face. They carried, between them, a camcorder, one of the big shoulder ones that were already a little out of date by '98, and a couple of disposable cardboard cameras, the kind you bought at a drugstore and dropped in a mailer when you were done. 2 young men documenting a good trip. And on their last evening up at the lake, in the long gold light, they did what young men do. They filmed each other. They took goofy pictures. They recorded themselves being happy in a beautiful place at the end of a hard climb, the way you do when you're 22, and the whole thing is still an adventure, and not yet a thing that happened to you. I have the tape. Trevor gave me the tape, and I have watched it more times than I should, and I am going to tell you about the 2 seconds on it, because the 2 seconds on the tape are the only moving image in this entire 100-year story, and they are very bad. Most of the tape is nothing. It is 2 friends at a lake. Mateo mugging for the camera, Trevor laughing behind it, the lake flat and gold, the dark wall of the timber across the water, and then there is a long, slow pan, Trevor swinging the camcorder across the far shore, just filming the scenery. the way you do, and for about 2 seconds, far down the opposite shore, in the deep shadow under the trees, where the gold light does not reach, something crosses. From the timber, across a small open stretch, back into the timber, upright, unhurried. And the distance is too great, and the shadow is too deep to make it anything for certain, except that you can see in the way it moves and the height it holds against the shoreline behind it, that it is very tall, and that it is walking on two legs, and that it is in no kind of hurry at all. Trevor did not see it. That is the thing he said to me, sitting in my office in 2009, his hands flat on his knees. He was looking through the viewfinder, filming the pretty shore, and he saw a pretty shore. He did not see anything cross. Neither of them did. They found it years later, the way everyone in this story finds it after the fact, in the recording, when Trevor was showing the old tape to his wife, and happened to freeze it at the wrong, the right, the only frame, and felt the bottom go out of a thing he had thought for 11 years was just a nice memory of a trip with a friend he had lost touch with. But the tape is not the worst of it. The disposable cameras are the worst of it, and I want to walk you to the worst one slowly, the way I had to come to it slowly, because Trevor did not even bring me the worst one to make a point. He brought me everything, all of it, in the envelope, because by 2009 he could not stand to have it in his house anymore, and the worst frame was just in the stack, near the bottom, the way these things always are. It is a photograph of Mateo Reyes. It is the last good light of that last evening. Mateo is close to the camera, filling most of the frame, grinning. That big, easy grin Trevor described to me with such grief that I had to look away. The grin of a 22-year-old at the end of the best kind of day. Behind him, a few feet behind him, is the edge of the timber, a tangle of brush and the dark gaps between the trunks. An ordinary background. The kind of background that is behind every snapshot anyone has ever taken in the woods. And in one of those gaps in the brush, a few feet behind Mateo's shoulder, low, lower than you would expect, as if it were leaning, as if it were bringing itself down to the height of a man's head to look at the back of a man's head, there is a face. I am going to be as careful as I know how to be, because I have had a long time to choose these words. It is almost a face. It has the things a face has, laid out roughly where a face lays them out. And that is exactly what is wrong with it, because they are laid out by something that has clearly studied a face from the outside, the way Thorne's surveyor studied that ridge, the way the thing has been studying us, through every lens we have ever pointed at that basin, and has reproduced the general idea of a face without one particle, of the thing that makes a face a person. It is pale where the brush is dark. The eyes, if they are eyes, are open, and they are not looking at the camera. They are looking at the back of Mateo's head, from a few feet away, while Mateo grins and does not know, and never knew, because Mateo Reyes did not see it either. Nobody ever sees it. Mateo grinned at his friend, and his friend's cheap cardboard camera, and a few feet behind him, something leaned out of the brush and brought its wrong face down level with his, and looked at him. And the only one of the three of them that knew it was there was the camera. Trevor told me that when they finally found that print, years later, Mateo Reyes looked at it for a long time and then put it down and did not say anything, and that the two of them, who had been best friends since they were boys, never really spoke again after that. Not from a falling out. There was no falling out. It was just that the thing in that photograph stood between them, the few feet between them, the same few feet it had stood behind Mateo's head, and neither of them could be in a room with it. Trevor said Mateo would not look at the prints, would not say the word for what it was, would not talk about that trip at all, and that the last time they spoke, Mateo said only one thing about it. He said, "I keep thinking about how it had to lean down, to be level with me. I keep thinking about how tall it must be when it stands up straight." That is 1998. That is as close as the camera has ever caught it. A few feet. A wrong face leaning down behind a smiling young man in the last gold light of a perfect day. And now you have seen all three. 1802 on the ridge. 54 at the tree line. 98 a few feet behind a man's head. The same basin. The same wrongness. Closer every time, across 100 years, and never once, not one single time, seen by a living eye. Come and sit with me one more time. Because there is a reason I have shown you these three together, and it is not the reason you think, and I have to tell you what I finally understood when I laid them on the table side by side, and why I have not been back up that drainage, and why I am never going to go. So here they are, the three of them, on my table, where I have looked at them for more years than I am comfortable telling you. 1902, 1954, 1998. A glass plate, a child snapshot, a disposable print, and the same thing standing in all three, in the same drainage of the Shasta-Trinity, coming closer across 100 years, and never once seen by a living eye. When people finally believe me, when I have walked them all the way through it, the way I have walked you, they almost always ask me the same question, and it is the wrong question, and I want to give you the right one instead. The question they ask is, what is it? And I have to tell them, gently, that I do not know, that I am an archivist, and not a priest, or a scientist, or a fool, and that I have spent 30 years declining to guess, because guessing is how you turn a thing you actually have, 3 clean photographs, into a thing you only believe, a story. I will not do that. I have the frames. I do not have the answer, and I have made my peace with the gap between those two things, because that gap is the whole truth of what I do. But there is a better question, and almost nobody asks it, and it is the one that has kept me up at night for 30 years, and it is this. Not what is it, but why can we not see it? Because that is the real horror of these 3 photographs, and it took me the longest time to let myself understand it. It is not that there is a tall thing in a forest in California. The world is wide and old, and I am too small to be sure of what is and is not in the deep parts of it. No. The thing that takes the floor out from under me every time is that 3 different cameras across 100 years saw it perfectly, plainly, with no trouble at all, and that not one of the human beings standing right there, looking right at it, holding the camera in their own 2 hands, could see it. The surveyor with his trained eye, the fire lookout, whose whole job was to see, the 2 young men with their good young eyes, the little girl who could see it until the world taught her not to. We do not see it, and the only honest conclusion I have been able to reach after 30 years is that we are not allowed to. That something about us, or something about it, edits it out of the picture our eyes hand to our minds every time so smoothly that we walk through that basin feeling nothing but the beauty of it, while the thing stands a few feet away and looks at the back of our heads. And the camera, the stupid, honest camera, is the one keyhole through which we are ever permitted to find out, weeks later, in a dark room or a drugstore envelope or a living room with the tape paused, that we were never alone, and were never, for 1 second, unwatched. That is why I have not been back up that drainage. Not because I am afraid of what is there. I am too old to be much afraid of what is there. I have not been back because I do not want to be photographed. I do not want there to be a fourth frame. I do not want some archivist 100 years from now to lay 4 photographs on a table and find me in the last one, smiling at a friend's camera by that cold lake, with a wrong, pale face leaning down a few feet behind my head, looking at me while I see nothing but the mountain and the beautiful gold light. So this is the thing I have brought you here to carry away, and it is not a comfortable thing, and I am sorry for that. But you have sat with me through all 3, and you have earned the truth instead of the comfort. The Shasta-Trinity is not what you think. I do not mean that as the title of a frightening story. I mean it the way I mean that a stone is heavy. That forest, and I have come to suspect it is not the only one, is a place where something stands in plain sight that we have been made unable to see. And the only proof we are ever given is the proof that comes too late, on film, after we are safely 200 miles and several weeks away. So if you go to a beautiful piece of deep country and you take your pictures, the way everyone does, the way all 4 of these families did, and the prints come back, look at them. Look at the edges. Look at the dark gaps in the trees behind your own smiling face. Not because looking will protect you. It will not. Nothing protected any of them. But because if there is something there, the camera will have caught it plainly, without mercy, the way it always does, and you will at least know the truth that all 3 of these people only learned too late. You were never the only one looking. And if you ever do find it, on a frame, standing where no one saw it stand, do the one thing every person in these 3 stories was wise enough or lucky enough to do. Do not go back to learn what it is. Put the photograph in a box, hand it to someone like me, and stay in the world your eyes are kind enough to show you, for as long as you are allowed to. Thank you for standing at the table with me. I'm going to put the 3 of them away now, back in their acid-free folders, back in the dark where they have waited so patiently to be seen. They will keep. They have kept 100 years already. That is the one thing a photograph is truly for. It waits, and it does not blink, and it does not lie, and it does not forget, and it will be there, holding what it holds, long after every eye that failed to see it has closed for good. Believe the frame, not your eyes, and the next time you are somewhere beautiful and deep and quiet, and you feel, just for a moment, watched, and you turn, and you see nothing at all. Raise your camera anyway. Just don't be too surprised by what comes back.